Well, hello. Our Gospel lectionary reading for today, the 14th of February, is Mark chapter 9 verses 2 to 9. And this is Mark's account of the Transfiguration. So we pick it up in verse 2. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my Son, the beloved, listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they'd seen, until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So this was the account from Mark of the Transfiguration. Where did this happen? Well, I haven't gone in any thorough way to look at Mark's Gospel, but I'm clear from Matthew's that this almost certainly happened on Mount Hermon, which is far, far in the north. In fact, it's the greatest extent of Jesus' journey to the north during his 3 years of ministry. It's the highest mountain in Israel. It looks to the south over the whole of the land, and it looks to the north, to the west, into Lebanon, and into the northeast, into Syria. It's a very large mass of land. I understand there are 3 peaks, but Hermon is the one where it would seem that this event happened. In Matthew's account, we see that it is as he comes back from Hermon, from the Transfiguration, that it's all back towards Jerusalem. I suspect the same is true for Mark. That Jesus, from this point, because it's in Mark chapter 9, it's well through the Gospel, is on his way back to what he knows awaits him as he runs his course with arrest, with trial, with crucifixion and death in Jerusalem. What is it though? Well, it strikes me that as in our life, so in Jesus, that there are marker post experiences that we have. Some of them are mountaintop ones and some of them are deep valley ones. But they're experiences that shape us, that inform us, that educate us, and that inspire and strengthen us. And I'm wanting to suggest today that this was a mountaintop experience for Jesus. It's one that was preparing him for, and his disciples, for what was about to follow. It's important to see these as gifts to us. I've had both. I've had mountaintop experiences and I've had deep valley, dark night of the soul experiences as well. And I've come to a place where I see them both as a gift. None of these things, I believe, happen by coincidence. They are things that are gifts that actually can potentially enrich our lives and open us to greater possibilities. They will shift our perspective and give us confidence in days of difficulty ahead. They can provide us with strength for the journey. Diana Butler Bass is an author who's become one of my favourites over the last year or two. She's American. She's a historian. She's a scholar. She's a kind of Christian philosopher. And in one of her books, one that I thoroughly enjoyed is her autobiography, though it's unusual that somebody writes an autobiography when they're only in their 40s. But she did until her life up until then. And she tells her own story. And she starts off because she grew up in a Methodist church and then became immersed in the youth culture of conservative evangelicalism. And this significantly shaped her life for a good many years. She got married and then found herself at this place wanting something more. And she discovered in the late 70s, early 80s, in the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Church, a richness in the liturgy, particularly in the Eucharist, the communion liturgy, which fed her soul. She was with her husband and they moved to Pasadena, I think it was, and she was, well, they may have actually lived there. She was wanting to go to this church that had been recommended to her. It was more liberal than she was used to. She'd be warned of that, but she'd find it okay. And so she went to the All Saints Episcopal Church in Pasadena in September of 1981. And she describes this in the introduction to her book. As I said, she loved the liturgy. She went in with her husband and they sat down the left-hand side of the church towards the front, and she looked forward and she noticed that one of the service who was going to serve at the communion, actually the chalice bearer, was not a heterosexual looking kind of guy. She was fairly sure that he was gay, and she felt a little bit, well, a good bit uncomfortable about that. She wasn't quite sure what to do with all of that. But she comforted herself with the words of St. Augustine that the efficacy of the sacrament wasn't affected by the person who was serving it. She did struggle though. So she went forward for the communion. She received the bread. And then, as she was waiting for the chalice as it was passed along the line, the words were recited, the words that even in a short time she'd come to love. The blood of Christ, the cup of salvation. And for the people before her, the cup was handed, the blood of Christ, the cup of salvation. When this man got in front of her, he stopped and he gently offered her the cup and quietly said, "The cup, it's the blood of Christ." And then strength for the journey. And she was shocked, and she was appalled, and she was devastated. She was very, very angry. This was not what she'd expected. This was not what she was looking for. The proper words were so important to her, and this person had taken the liberty to offer something completely out of fantasy land for her. She was very upset. She determined that she would never ever go back to that church again. 15 years later, she returns with a new husband, and she'd forgotten about that event, almost. She goes into the church for the first time again after 15 years, and they sat down and she realized they were sitting in almost the same place which had sat previously. And everything for her had changed. Her theology had shifted. And she was in a different place. She'd find herself being able to shake free from what she regarded as the fear-based strictures of her formative conservative evangelicalism. And so she's sitting. And she goes forward for the communion. And the chalice bearer, we go through the same process with the bread. The chalice bearer holds the cup and he hands it to each person before her. The blood of Christ, the cup of salvation. The blood of Christ, the cup of salvation. The blood of Christ, the cup of salvation. And then he gets to Diana. He hands her the cup And he says, the blood of Christ, strength for the journey. And then to the next person, the blood of Christ, the cup of salvation. The blood of Christ, the cup of salvation. She said it pretty well broke her. She was just filled with such a sense of joy and gratitude, and just overwhelmed with a weeping desire of love for God, that she'd been given this gift a second time. The person with the cup could have had no idea as to the effect that what he'd said had upon her. You see, the title of her autobiography, the title of that book, is actually Strength for the Journey. And you'll notice it's also the title of this particular message, Strength for the Journey. I want us to notice that there are no coincidences. It's all gift. It's all gift. For Diana, she first regarded the first one as an affront. And the second one, because it was exactly the same, almost, as the most wonderful gift. Depends on where we're sitting, on our perspective. But it's all gift. And so we see Jesus here with a mountaintop experience. One that is to elevate him. One that is to strengthen and to comfort and to encourage him with what's ahead of him. This is just before his death. Both for Jesus and for his disciples. This is where the disciples needed to be. And they needed to be there. They needed to be witnesses who could actually report what happened. Which is what they did. But they weren't there simply to report it. It was there also for their benefit, for their strengthening, for their encouragement, for what was to come. I imagine you have had these experiences. I have. You can look back at significant experiences both in the valley and also on the mountaintop. Ones that the Lord has continued to use to reassure me when things got a bit wobbly, to strengthen me when I wasn't sure, to give me confidence when a whole lot of doubt had seeped in as to whether I was really even called to this at all. As I would look back and says, no, that was real. That was something that I've never doubted. And so here we see this. And so we see Jesus meeting with Moses, the giver of the law, and Elijah, the archetypal prophet. How did they know that they were those? I don't know. Maybe they asked Jesus on the way down. But I think they just had a sense of knowing. They knew that they knew that they knew who these two were. And Jesus comes as the Son of Man. Now, that's what he said. He described himself in this passage as the Son of Man. Some think this points to his mortality. I don't think that's what it's about. It points to his authority. It points to his right to rule. Now, that may be kind of surprise to you, but just encourage you, if you want to check it out, grab yourself a concordance and look for every reference within the Gospels of the Son of Man, and it soon becomes pretty clear that that's what it is. He's the King. He's the prophet. He's the priest. He encapsulates all the things of all three of them, of Jesus himself as the Son of Man, of Moses, of the lawgiver and of the priest, and of Elijah as the archetypal prophet. And so here he is, and he has this experience for himself as he's prepared for what happens next. The mountaintop itself is important, I want to suggest, because its height gives perspective. It gives us a sense of being able to look around and see things in a proper proportion. When my dad was alive, actually, quite many years ago, he had a job at a special education school in the Waitaki Valley. And there was a point where he was having a bit of a rough time. He was actually the cook. And we were up there for the weekend, so he and I went for a walk. There's lots of mountains around there. We walked and walked and walked up and up and up and up and up. And we were able to look down on the little community that he lived in. And it was so small, almost insignificant, when you looked at the whole. And it was a way of getting a bit of perspective on a life that had sort of crowded in on him, that it was actually part of something much, much bigger. That there was perspective that was much richer, and that these current issues, they will pass. He will move on from there. They will pass. There are always opportunity for new beginnings. Moses, one of the ones that Jesus meets with. He died on Mount Nebo. I've been on it. It looks out over the Promised Land. It looks out over the Jordan Valley, over Bethlehem, over Jericho. And the Jerusalem hills can be seen, on a nice day anyway, in the distance. It looks out over the whole of the land, yet it's not in the land. And it's kind of important, I think, for Moses, that is this where he dies. He's able to see where the people that he's led for the last 40 years are going to go next, and it's going to be okay. He's able to let them go with a measure of, of confidence that God is leading them and is at work. Jesus is on Mount Hermon, as I said just before his death. He's able to look in both directions. Looks over the whole of Israel where his ministry has been exercised. But he's also able to look into Gentile country, recognizing that his mission, his ministry, is much more global than just with Israel. And it's important for the disciples as well to recognize this. And it reminds us too of God's call on the church to go into all the world. So we see here the importance of perspective, of context, of backdrop. This moment is a gift to Jesus. It provides him with strength for the journey. It's a gift to the disciples. They're forever able to look back and give thanks for this event, a reminder that it was real, a reminder that the whole Jesus story was real, that they experienced something that was beyond themselves. They each had it, they were each there. If it was a delusion, it was very much a shared one, and it gave them strength in their dark times. I want to suggest too for each of us, there's a real importance in remembering, in celebrating, and in giving thanks in both our good and our dark times, because they are not coincidences. They are all come to us as gifts to actually ultimately provide us with strength for the journey. We need to see them and celebrate them as such. God bless you.